So today we're going to be talking about something that I sort of telegraphed that I was going to talk about for a while, but just didn't get to it. Mostly because there were other things happening. There was YouTube drama and blah, blah, blah. So today in this video, what I want to talk about is 4 styles of parenting. And I want to discuss them from the perspective of leftism. That is, how do these things work and how do they create outcomes? Like, what outcomes happen based on your behavior as a parent? And let me explain why this matters. So I did get some feedback, and one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten from a few people has been essentially, if I boil it down, is the argument that, Jess, are you arguing that children should not respect their parents? No. Jess, are you arguing that kids shouldn't listen to their parents? No. Not even a little bit. What I'm arguing for is for parents not to be authoritarians. My argument is that authoritarianism at any level of society is toxic. And authoritarianism, whether it is at the national level, that is, people are at some way, shape, or form running an authoritarian type government. We saw this with, the coup attempts and the fascism of Trump. We saw this with, we see this with China. We see this with North Korea. We see this with all sorts of things. Authoritarians have very clear behaviors that they do. Some of these are things like using force to try to quash any kind of dissidence or any type of rebellion. You can see this very clearly with the Hong Kong protests and some of the ways China reacted to that. You can see it very clearly in the United States when BLM was happening and Trump sent unmarked vans to grab people and throw them in them. Authoritarians don't engage in an argument. They don't engage in discourse. What they do is they act out. They want supremacy. They want control. And just as you can see in authoritarian countries, right, the last 4 years has demonstrably made the United States worse. That is absolutely just absolutely true. Sorry, thanks for playing. But you can see this in other countries too, right? This is why fascism never works out in the long run, because often it sort of drills itself into the ground. And so if that's true at the larger levels, if that's true at these levels in which you are talking about the national scale, what about in the smaller scale? What about in the community? What about the family? And my argument is that the family, parents who act authoritarian in family, are no different. It's just a simple level of scale and power. A person can, by all rights, act authoritarian in a way that will, by all measure, do the same thing on a micro scale that you would see within an authoritarian country. So let's talk about this, because I think this is a really important thing. Boop. Okie dokie. So what we're going to be looking at tonight is this. This is a lovely paper I found online. It's by Amy Morin, LCSW, and reviewed by an MD. This was updated as of May 15th, 2017. And so what this goes over is these 4 types of parenting, and it describes the effects of them based on the research. So I think this is a really cool document. So I want to go through it with you guys because I want to use this as the stepping stone to make these arguments, okay? So let's look at this. 4 types of parenting styles and their effects on kids. What is your parenting style? Your parenting style can affect everything from how your child weighs to how she feels about herself, so it's important to ensure your parenting style is supporting healthy growth and development. Researchers have discovered 4 types of parenting styles. Each style has a different take on what a parent's role is and what it should be in a child's life. These are authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved. And you can look at them on these spectrums. So if you look at increasing support, you can see that it goes from neglectful, so uninvolved, to permissive gives so much support that there's no pushback. There's no meaningful sort of restrictions, which sort of, excuse me, if I want to be really clear, not doing so can be very harmful, because I know no one likes talking about this, especially the anarchy folks, but at least the dumb aren't anarchy folks. Smart people are totally aware of this shit. But essentially, the issue is that if you're giving only support to your kid and not creating any sorts of structure, this can create problems, because it can create the scenario to where your kid doesn't feel like there's any repercussions and there's no sense of actual safety. Remember, children are born into this world effectively helpless. And so one of the big things you'll see with attachment theory or other types of discussions like that, and we will cover attachment theory at some point, when you talk about these different types of things, one of the things you're going to get into is the way in which the idea of permissiveness actually can go way too far. I've actually heard this one also called laissez-faire parenting, where it's just sort of, whatever, do what you want. And I find that stuff really problematic, because again, as kids are born into the world, they don't really have anything they can do. They kind of need the parents' safety. And the problem is if they don't get that, if their parents dangerous or their parents scary, this creates different effects. Kids want security, but there's a balance between this. So this is the increasing support line. We can see that right here. And we have the increasing control line right here. And you can see this is the uninvolved parent with no control, all the way to authoritarian parent, right? Now you'll notice up here in the corner, increased support and increased control, the authoritative parent, right? So we want to differentiate these, authoritarian versus authoritative. And why these matter is that authoritarian parents do not offer support. All they ask for is compliance. Now, before I get into these specifics, I want to talk about something really quick. It's very easy to sort of straw man me and say that, like, I'm saying there shouldn't be any hierarchy in families. This is actually very incorrect and dumb. The reality of the situation is that families by their nature have hierarchies, but just like I would say with any power imbalance, there should always be awareness around it. Parents must remember that their kids are not adults. So when the kid does something you don't like, it's not because they're hateful towards you or they are somehow conniving against you. The reality of the fact is that they are just being a kid or expressing a need. Actually, a really good argument for this is, paradoxically compared to the videos I released last week, is actually a Lily Orchard video about, it's actually a My Little Pony episode. She mentions in it that there's a character who is the child of two royal, I don't know what they're called, Pegasi or whatever. And essentially what happens is that this character goes on a terror spree because her auntie Twilight isn't taking care of her. She's trying to do too much. The kid is bored. The kid acts out. Then the kid gets in trouble. And by the end of the episode, it's shown that this character, Twilight, her aunt, is in the wrong by being neglectful or trying to be authoritarian at moments of trying to give some sort of repercussions. She's not looking at the ways this stuff happens. She's assuming this kid is a rational agent. She's doing this intentionally. And it just stands that that's not the case. Love, would you close the window?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's just getting noisy out there because of the plane. So, let's get into what Amy Morin says about this. So we'll actually start from the bottom because I actually think this is important. So we're going to go over first uninvolved parenting. Do any of these statements sound familiar? You don't ask your child about school or homework. You rarely know where your child is or who she is with. You don't spend time with your child. If so, you might be an uninvolved parent. Uninvolved parents basically expect children to raise themselves. They usually don't devote much time or energy into meeting the child's basic needs. Uninvolved parents are often neglectful, but sometimes it's not intentional. A parent with mental health issues or substance abuse problems, for example, may not be able to care for a child's physical and emotional needs on a consistent basis. At other times, uninvolved parents lack knowledge about child development, and sometimes they're simply overwhelmed with other problems like work, paying bills, and managing a household. Uninvolved parents tend to have very little knowledge of what their child is doing. There tends to be very few rules. Children may not receive much guidance, nurturing, or parental attention. When parents are uninvolved, children struggle with self-esteem issues. They tend to perform poorly in school. They also exhibit frequent behavioral problems and rank low in happiness. Yes, because by being neglectful or just uninvolved, what you're essentially doing is you're basically transmitting to the kid that the messaging being transmitted there is you're not important or you don't matter. And I feel like these things are super important because when this happens, kids will start to act out to better express their needs, because if a kid gets yelled at least negative attention is still attention. And these are the kids that sort of have to grow up too quickly. They mentioned here like kids that have to take care of their basic needs. That doesn't just mean emotional needs. That can mean like physical needs, right? Food, things like that. I've talked to many clients who literally had to basically raise themselves, and it's not great by any stretch. So there's that. Permissive parenting. Do any of these statements sound like you? You set rules but rarely enforce them. You don't give out consequences very often. You think your child will learn best with little interference from you. If those statements sound familiar, you might be a permissive parent. Permissive parents are lenient. They often only step in when there's a serious problem. They don't give out consequences very often. They're quite forgiving, and they adopt an attitude of kids will be kids. When they do use consequences, they often give in if a child begs or promises to be good. Permissive parents usually take on more of a friend role than a parent role. They often encourage their children to talk with them about their problems, but they usually don't push with much effort into discouraging poor choices or bad behavior, and may not discourage a lot of bad behaviors. Kids who grow up with permissive parents tend to struggle academically. They may exhibit more behavioral problems as they don't appreciate authority and rules. They often have low self-esteem and may report a lot of sadness. Again, for the reason we just mentioned. The parent is giving them care, but the lack of structure is actually doing active harm, right? Because the lack of structure is one of the ways you communicate care. This is why, to some degree, just letting a kid do whatever and just telling them you love them is not enough, because, again, it doesn't create around them a sense of safety. They're also at higher risk for health problems like obesity, because permissive parents struggle to limit junk food intake. They also even are more likely to have cavities because permissive parents don't enforce good habits like ensuring children brush their teeth. Abso-fucking-lutely. I've actually actively seen this happen. So we're going to skip up here. We're going to go to the one we've been talking about, which is authoritarian parenting. Do any of these statements sound like you? You believe kids should be seen and not heard. When it comes to rules, you believe it's my way or the highway. You don't take your child's feelings into consideration. If any of those rings true, you might be an authoritarian parent. Authoritarian parents believe kids should follow the rules without exception. They also don't allow kids to get involved in problem-solving challenges or obstacles. Instead, they make rules and enforce them with little consequence, enforce the consequences, with little regard for a child's opinions. Authoritarian parents are famous for saying, "Because I said so." When a child questions the reason behind a rule, they are not interested in negotiating, and their focus is on obedience. Authoritarian parents may use punishments instead of discipline, so rather than teaching a child how to make better choices, they're often focusing on making a child suffer for his mistakes. Children who grow up with a strict authoritarian parents tend to follow rules much of the time, but they may develop self-esteem problems. Children of authoritarian parents may also become hostile or aggressive. Studies show that they may become good liars as they have grown conditioned to lie to avoid punishment. So this directly, completely connects to what I said last time. That is, if you want your kids to comply, being an authoritarian is the dumbest fucking thing you can do. I said in the last video that I hate when parents say things about disrespect, and I hold to that. And the reason I say that is this. Whenever parents hold to this notion that their kids have to respect them, as I've said before, this can have two meanings. Either it can mean the child is actively behaving in a way that is hurtful and ad hominem against the parent, right? They're actively trying to hurt their parents' feelings. Or disrespect in this context means that the child is not obeying, that the child is not doing what you want them to do. That is an issue of respect. You're actually doing a little bit of a switcheroo. That's not respect, that's obedience. I can respect you and still not listen to a damn thing you say. I can respect you and still do what I want. The idea that a kid is being disrespectful because they go around you is, in my opinion, an utter... How do I want to say that? It is an utter irresponsible move by a parent to call their child disrespectful for their child not obeying, and then they get surprised that their child then finds ways to go behind their backs. Right? This is stuff that can lead to kids having things like conduct disorders. This is stuff that can lead to kids struggling with self-esteem. This can lead to kids who at one point just break down because the overwhelming stress of having to follow all the rules. Again, as I've said before, parents often frame this as an idea of, I either control what my kids do or I don't. And the issue with this is that that's not the framing. It's what it is simply, do you want to know what your kid's doing or not, don't you? Authoritarian parents sacrifice long-term care and relationship with their children for short-term obedience. But what this does is it teaches the child to be afraid of their parent. And as such, their parent doesn't know shit about them. Like, no joke, this is just toxicity at work. It's utterly nonsensical. And so we want to look at this critically, because when we're talking about leftist values or we're talking about progressivism, we have to look at every level. And we have to look at this level especially because I think authoritarian parents are absolutely problematic. Every kid I've ever seen that has a bad outcome comes from parents like this. Parents who literally cannot fathom the idea that their kids have their own beliefs, ideas, and ways that they want to be. I've seen this from parents being, in denial or saying that their kids' LGBT status is somehow fucking a phase, or no, you just can't do that, I said so. It's nonsensical, because the more pressure you put on, there's a point where the kid is either going to crack under the force, or they're going to start looking for ways around you. You've absolutely at that point fucked up the relationship with you and your kid. Hell, I'll even go so far as to say, if you do that, you're a bad parent. Because when you make the relationship with your child one where you promote fear to get obedience, what you're essentially doing is saying, you don't care about this kid, you want them to behave so they don't bother you. And you know what? I'll throw myself under the bus under this one. Back when I was a 20-something, I got with somebody who was older than me, happened to be 3 months pregnant, and I decided to become a parent at that point. And sadly, my wife passed away in 2004. She was in a horse riding accident. It was pretty rough, and I was left on my own. Made some really dumb choices about who I dated. But at that point, I became very close to this, because it wasn't really about me loving and taking care of my child. It was about making them disappear so that I couldn't be bothered, because I was so tired and so stressed I didn't want to deal with it. And this was actively wrong. What I did was incorrect. I've had to work really hard to rebuild a relationship with my child. My child now is like 21. We have a pretty damn good relationship at this point in my mind. And that's because I unlearned this bullshit because I had to work with them to rebuild the trust so they didn't think I was this lashing out monster. So that's one of the reasons I take this stuff so personally, is because I know what it's like. I know what it's like inside the head of an authoritarian parent. Past all the bluster about respect and good behavior and all this other bullshit, what it comes down to is you want your children silent so you don't have to be bothered with them. You want your children to not speak up about their needs because they may conflict with what you want. This is just authoritarianism at a smaller scale. Authoritarian parents are just dictators. Little tiny kings of little tiny fiefdoms throwing their weight around and using force to get what they want. Out of these three, I would argue, and we're going to get to the fourth in a minute, but with these three, I would actually argue this one may be the most damaging, directly. While the other two, which we talked about, permissive parenting and uninvolved parenting, are by their nature problematic as well, authoritarian parenting at some level always becomes some form of mental, emotional, or physical abuse. So when I say that, no, I don't believe that your kid shouldn't listen to you, I'm saying give your kid a reason to. If your only reason is you happen to have sex, that you happen to help create them in a very easy act, like think about this really critically for just 10 seconds. To have a kid, the only prerequisite is sex, and you don't even have to be good at it. Right? You can just knock someone up, and spoiler alert, they may not have felt anything, they might not have orgasmed, they might not have got anything out of this, and you basically left them there just kind of like, I guess, used, and you still can get a kid out of that. There is no prerequisites for children. There's nothing that in any meaningful way says that you're ready and able to be a parent. And so when you have kids, it's your responsibility to work to become that parent. But I'll be honest, other than giving them existence, which they should be, genuinely grateful for, existing's pretty cool, I like it. This is why I tell children, well, let me say it this way. This is why I argue, because I don't think I've said this to a client. I don't want to be so blasé and say that that's the case. I don't think that's what I've done. What I would say more regularly is that my argument is, and this is kind of how I think of things, is being open and supportive to your child is going to create more respect and a better sense of communication and interaction than authoritarianism. To act in an authoritarian manner is to do harm. It is to use fear as a motivator for essentially making things the way you want. It grabs that structure, but it utterly lacks the compassion. Kids doing something is not typical childhood or teenage mistakes. Kids doing something is not just them expressing a need. It is them actively violating some rule you've arbitrarily set, and as such, are now basically enforcing, either through words or your actions. So we'll come back around on this, but I want to talk about this last type. And so we looked at this. We've kind of covered all of these ones on the square. But we're going to talk about the last one, which is authoritative, and is generally the ones that are seen as being the best out of all parenting. So authoritative parenting, do you have any of these statements sound like you? You put a lot of effort into ensuring you have a positive relationship with your child. You explain the reasons behind your rules. You enforce rules and give consequences, but you take your child's feelings into consideration. If so, you might be an authoritative parent. Like authoritarian parents, authoritative parents establish clear rules, but they allow for reasonable exceptions to the rules. Authoritative parents often use logical consequences that teach life lessons. They also use positive discipline to prevent behavior problems that reinforce good behaviors. So they may be more likely to create reward systems and praise good behavior. Children raised with the authoritative discipline tend to be happy and successful. They're also more likely to be good at making decisions and evaluating safety risks on their own. Research has found kids who have authoritative parents are more likely to be responsible adults who feel comfortable expressing their opinions. So what this does is it creates structure, the necessary structure for a child to feel cared for, and it creates a sense of I'm there with you. The rules exist for a reason, because they are the most sound and logical, not because I said so. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? The big shift here is that you're bringing on the structure similar to an authoritarian parent, but you bring forth the level of care from a permissive parent. You're essentially taking the potential best of both worlds. Now, again, we can argue structures can go too far and all that, but genuinely speaking, I think this is a really important thing to recognize. So, why the fuck am I talking about this? The big reason I'm talking about this tonight is because I want to spell out something that I think is really important. And that is, every aspect of our lives, every action we take is, by its nature, a reflection of either our internal feelings, our own shadows and demons that we're dealing with internally, or just our values. My goal with the channel is to try to take some of these things that are happening in the background and bring them to the foreground so that we can become more intentional with them. So, for example, I, at one point, because of the trauma and things that I had gone through, was an authoritarian parent. None of my trauma or the loss of my wife excuses any of this. None whatsoever. But I had to learn over time, partially through the advent of better partners as time went on, and because of trying to forge a relationship with my kid, I became more of an authoritative parent. I wanted to understand their feelings and understand more clearly who they are. And I'm still learning this stuff to this day. It takes time. But I have a pretty good relationship with them, and they're doing very well now. Now, that's not just because I tried. They've been putting a ton of effort in. They're doing well in school, all that great stuff. But the reason that things changed is that I stopped being an authoritarian. I stopped essentially flipping out because I wasn't getting my way, essentially. And that is the problem with authoritarian parents. Past the smokescreen of their fearful behavior and their ask for respect, at the end of the day, they're just whining children who want things to go their way. Now, I want to be clear with this argument. My goal here is not to establish that kids shouldn't listen to their parents. I'm saying you need to work with your kids so they know their reason to respect you. Because I don't think that respect should be assumed. Just because you were able to have sex doesn't mean your kid owes you shit. What they do is they go by your behavior, because we can't deductively prove who you are as a person. We can only inductively do so by looking at your behavior. And if your behavior is lashing out, not giving a shit about your kids, and only just enforcing things on them because you arbitrarily want certain things for them, spoiler, you're doing harm. And your kid is understandably going to not want to listen to you and start finding ways around you, or they are going to crack under the pressure. Either way, you are not only doing harm to them, but you are actually in some way, shape, or form leading to the absolute dissolution of your relationship with them. I see this all the time. So, before we kind of end this segment, I do want to talk about this. Here's some fun research. I'll put this in the info below. What are authoritarian parents, and what are some of the things that happen from them? The child may develop poor social skills. This problem may arise as the child has grown up following his parents' instructions in social situations rather than him being given the opportunity to learn through trial and error and on his or her own initiative. For example, as a child, she or he may have been instructed only to speak to adults when spoken to and seen and not heard, which could make the kid really uncomfortable, make them very, very socially awkward, and have a difficult time. Because of the way in which authoritarian parents may condition or program their children, the children may grow up to be highly conformist, right? Acting in line with the prevailing views and attitudes of others, irrespective of whether it's right or wrong, and so on. This is a big one. Evangelical Christians will usually have kids that are evangelical Christians, and they will basically teach that conformity is what must happen. Unthinking conformity makes them vulnerable to exploitation. If you're obedient without any critical thinking, this is how cults happen. This is how the religious right keeps their lock on kids. This is a lot of things. This is by its nature one of the most awful things authoritarian parents do to their kids, is promote a level of obedience and conformity that is so over the top that it's going to do damage. No one fits fully into the way society frames who someone should be. No one. And arguably, this is one thing I would say with trans people, is this is exactly one of the big issues. If you're someone raised by an authoritarian parent and you're transgender, you may highly struggle against this conformist nature, because you may believe that to go against this is to essentially mean that you would destroy everything in your life, or even worse so, you may not even realize it. You might just keep suffering and not understand why. Bumped my mic there. Sorry about that. All right. Excessively self-blaming, consciously or unconsciously inferring erroneously that they must be intrinsically bad. Know that one pretty well. More than averagely susceptible to depression. Again, because if they're basically taught that they're inherently bad, because authoritarian parents by their nature essentially teach kids, but stay with me, they essentially teach kids that they're inherently bad and that humans are inherently bad. By creating such rigid rules, you're essentially saying kids have to be constrained, and as such, you're essentially going, you're inherently bad, work on it. This is actually why I don't like the idea of original sin, because it treats the same thing. You're bad and have to earn back. I don't like that framework because it essentially damages the person from the get. Let's see. 2b. However, the reverse may also occur depending, in part, upon the child's particular temperament. The child may be highly rebellious due to anger and resentment she harbors against his or her parent for the excessive controlling behavior. These individuals, too, may be highly self-blaming and self-critical, and may turn to drugs or drinking in an attempt to reduce such painful emotions. So if you have a kid that starts drinking early on or starts using drugs, usually correlated to authoritarian parenting. People try to escape reality, try to deal with emotions and needs that aren't being met, and that is one of the ways that happens. I am very much of the opinion that drug abuse is not a character flaw. It is an issue of attachment and an issue of emotional needs not being met. Right? So I'll kind of finish off this with saying, the goal here is to be an authoritative parent. It is to simultaneously hear and understand your children, understand their feelings, work with them on compromises. When I work with families, one of the things I'll often say is, work as a team. As your kids get older, their relationship, their role with you and the family is going to shift and change. Kids are very different from 3 to 15, right? And as such, I think it's really, really important to go through and work with them to build that relationship into something new. Okay? And one of the ways I like to do that is with teenagers. I like to have the family sit down and discuss, okay, here's what the labor distribution is. Here's what everyone's doing. Here's all the things that need to be done. How do we divide these up? And by working with them to figure out how to make these home-based needs and things like that met, they're now part of it. They're now actually invested, right? So I'm going to end this here. I'm going to say thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment. Please subscribe if you like the channel. If you feel like you want to donate, you can go to streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip. You can also become a patron. The link's down below. With that said, I hope that this was beneficial, and I hope this answered some questions. This is something I've said previously. I'm going to be thinking more about this, and we're going to be coming up with more concrete arguments as time goes on, but I wanted to touch on this again. So thank you so much for watching. Ring the bell if you want notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.